This video is brought to you by Aura. Ari Aster is one of my favorite little freaks. In my opinion, right out the gate, the man has made two classics in the horror genre, Midsommar and Hereditary, two amazing movies that felt properly terrifying and sort of became the new standard for modern horror movies. When Hereditary dropped, things shifted. Due to its massive success as well as its pristine look, psychological horror became the hot new thing, and it only got hotter after Midsommar. Love him or hate him, I don't think you can deny the fact that Ari Aster is one of the most influential directors of the last 10 years. Which is why it makes sense that after 4 whole years since his last film, after countless films have attempted to imitate his style, Aster just did something completely different, but also proved that he is still operating on a higher level than most directors. He did this with his latest film, Beau is Afraid. Beau is Afraid stars Joaquin Phoenix, and it's about a guy who needs to get to his mom's house, and who also desperately needs to come. It's also 3 hours long. I liked this movie quite a bit, but I'll get this one out of the way. It didn't need to be 3 hours long. I like that he's able to turn such a simple premise into an Odyssey-like epic, but this thing has a lot of fat to it that at times brings down the weight of what he already has. I get that the longer we sit with this character, the harder that first line of credits is going to hit at the end, but I just got tired after a while. I also really want to rewatch this movie, but I don't know if I can do it all again. It was disturbing. Almost as disturbing as when you Google yourself and are shocked to see your personal information exposed on one of those public listing sites. You see, data brokers are making a fortune on selling your information to robocallers, spammers, and others who want to learn more about you, like where you live. Scary stuff, but that's exactly why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, Aura. Aura can identify data brokers exposing your info and submit opt-out requests on your behalf. Brokers are legally required to remove your info if you ask them to, but they make it super hard to do. Let Aura handle it for you. Aura also does so much to protect you or your family from online threats you can't see. It's super easy to set up, so you don't have to download several different apps to get things like parental controls, antivirus software, VPN, password management, identity theft insurance, and more. You get everything at one affordable price. I love the fact that Aura is there to notify me if any of my information has been found on the dark web. I do not have the mental capacity to think about these kinds of things, and it's nice that I can let Aura handle all this stuff for me so I can feel a lot safer online. You can either let people continue to exploit and profit off your private information, or you can go to aura.com/Karsten to start your 2-week free trial, also linked below in the description. I want to rewatch it because not only is there a lot of movie, but there's a lot of stuff in the movie. Every scene and location is jam-packed with detail. The production design in this movie is just breathtaking and reason enough to see it in IMAX. Which, by the way, hilarious that this movie is getting an IMAX release. It's like Synecdoche, New York getting an IMAX release. Who is letting this happen? But I'm glad it is, because love it or hate it, it is undeniable how beautiful the movie looks, despite so much of the content within the film being so horrific. There's a scene in here that is mostly animated. It uses green screen and different textures, and for a good chunk of the scene, I couldn't really tell what was real and what wasn't. This might get me into some hot water, but it reminded me of the ballet sequence in The Red Shoes, where an already otherworldly film goes off the rails completely and turns into something even stranger. For how many styles it messes with, it never feels cheap or random. That scene is a spectacle and will definitely be most people's favorite part of the movie. Probably because it's one of the few scenes in the film that doesn't make me feel like I'm gonna throw up, and it's still pretty upsetting, so what does that say? Yeah, let's stop beating around the bush. No matter how beautiful the movie looked, nothing could stop it from being the most anxiety-inducing film I've sat through since climax. Maybe it was a bad idea to chug a large iced cold brew right before this. I had jitters the entire first chunk of it. Or maybe the film is just a really good depiction of anxiety. All I know is that I did not have a good time. It's kind of like, hey, what if literally everything in the world was out to get you? What if you were being watched at all times? What if your home wasn't even your home? What if leaving your home was even worse? My man Beau is having a miserable time this entire movie. It is basically 3 hours of just misery, but the film pulls it off by being extremely funny. Not only is the film funny, but the humor is just essential to how it functions. It would not be as good of a movie if it wasn't this funny. The first 30 or so minutes are a great example because all of these horrible events collapsing in on each other, getting worse and worse, it's fantastic. I like this kind of comedy a lot. It's extremely simple yet clever, and it's the kind where the way a line is delivered completely sells it. It's funny that Joaquin Phoenix stars in this because it's almost like, what if Joker was actually funny? Just a guy having a bad time, but like, that's the joke. I don't mean to sound like a broken record here, but this movie's humor specifically works by avoiding being self-aware. If there was ever a moment where Beau acknowledged how bad things were, rather than just living in it the way he does, to an extent where he doesn't even feel like a real person anymore, it would break the nightmare that the film lives in. In a nightmare, nobody is like, well, this sucks. No, in a nightmare, you're like, oh god, and that is essentially what Phoenix is doing here. Just just doing those noises. For that reason, despite how much this just feels like Ari Aster's therapy session, the film does feel like it lacks a human element to it. If you look at this next to Danny or Annie in Midsommar and Hereditary, Beau is undoubtedly the least fleshed out protagonist he's written. Yet, weirdly enough, it's this story that resonated with me personally more than either of those films. Again, I have to give Joaquin Phoenix some credit for this too. Beau is a relatively simple character who is mostly tossed into these scenarios throughout the film. For a good chunk of it, it doesn't even feel like he's making that many active decisions. Things just keep happening to him. And even though Phoenix plays this character in distress the entire film, he forces himself to find some sort of range inside of that one emotion that makes for a pretty interesting performance. The real standout here though is Patti LuPone, who, without spoiling, really steals the entire show with her performance. It feels like a mix of everything you feared and a lot of pent-up aggression being released at once. It's both sort of satisfying and also really unsettling. I'm also not seeing enough love for Kylie Rogers, who plays the most unhinged teenage girl. I hope Darren Aronofsky is taking notes, because this is how you do this character. Make her kind of funny, give her something that she cares about, make her presence so unpredictable and unsettling that just her voice screaming in the other room is enough to make your skin crawl. Ugh, it's just so good. I loved every moment she was on screen. Everything in that section of the film was so funny and tragic, it really worked for me. Which, speaking of, I would say in general the film is split up into these 4 sections, each marked by a cut to black after Beau hurts himself. And once you pick up on that, you kind of have to settle in for whatever strange world you're gonna have to sit through for the next 45 minutes. And that said, when I wasn't feeling it, I wasn't feeling it. And not being totally sucked into a movie like this can make it a real eye roller. It puts a lot of trust in the audience's willingness to just accept its nightmare logic, and if you're ever not on board, things feel really messy. But that said, that is something I sort of appreciate about the film. The fact that it doesn't operate in such a robotic way where you see where things are going. And that's quite the feat for someone like Ari Aster, who's made 2 incredibly influential films that could have easily felt really predictable at this point. But instead, the way in which it's presented to you is so grand and so committed to the bit that you gotta respect it for not even giving a shit. It's the same thing I was saying about the humor. These atmospheric, psychological horror movies only work if they actually commit. And while they might result in you rolling your eyes every now and then, it makes for a pretty intense experience. I can see why, for many people, this is a quote-unquote puzzle movie that demands the classic ending explained video. It has that thing about it that makes you feel like, oh, there's something sneaky and clever in here that's hiding in the frame, and oh, I'm not supposed to get it. I mean, I can't blame people for feeling that way. I feel the same way. It's kind of how Hereditary and Midsommar felt. But in my opinion, with Beau is Afraid, if you don't get it, it's because you were paying too close attention to these clues and Easter eggs, instead of doing what the film wants you to do, which is just give into it. Not in a way that excuses it from actual criticism, because yes, there are scenes here that feel overlong and that don't work as much as others, but at the end of the day, I do see this movie as a pretty simple film about anxious attachment styles and the feeling of being too scared to let people into your life because of the way you were raised. That's really all this is, right? On one hand, you might ask, did we need a 3-hour film to get this feeling across? No, I guess not, but I like that we did. I like that Ari Aster used his pull to make a balls-to-the-wall, Insano-style fantasy epic about going to your mom's house and not being able to come. Because what you get from watching these things happen in such a realistic yet exaggerated way is a sense of catharsis, and that's reason enough to love it. I don't think it's a perfect movie. It does have some flaws, but I really enjoyed it, and it solidified Ari Aster as being one of the most interesting filmmakers working today. A lot of it works, some of it doesn't, but it's one of those movies where maybe give it a year and all of it might click. Maybe all of it won't. I just respect the hell out of this film. I'm glad it exists, and I don't think I'll be able to forget about it. So thanks for watching. Go watch Beau is Afraid and form your own opinion, and I'll see you in the next one.